Hi, this is Sasha from Nira. We're doing a podcast today with Tara from IDEO.
Yeah, hi, I'm Tara Tan. I'm an investor at IDEO CoLab Ventures. So IDEO CoLab Ventures is the investment arm of IDEO, which is a global design firm known for pioneering the whole idea of human-centered design. Long story short, about 5 years ago, we started an R&D lab that was really exploring what blockchain was good for. And then from then on, we were just working and prototyping with a lot of sort of Web3 companies and companies in the blockchain space to really discover use cases. We were prototyping with everything from IPFS to building crypto wallets and so on and so forth. Fast forward 4 to 5 years, at IDEO, we've really been championing the importance of user experience and what this means to space. As we know, crypto and blockchain is a very, very technical space where a lot of the innovation is always on a technological front. And while that's important, I think what we are hoping to remind everyone and remind ourselves as well is that a lot of this innovation also relies on the human, right? And sort of centering around the human need. So this is something that we've been championing for the last 4 to 5 years at IDEO, and now we have an early stage venture fund that invests in blockchain and the distributed web.
And how did you get into the space overall?
A long time ago. So 2010, I opened my first Bitcoin wallet. I remember reading about the idea of peer-to-peer money, and that was something that just totally captured my imagination. So I opened my first Bitcoin wallet. I was super excited. And then, I kind of never really thought about it after that because I wasn't, I was like, is this magic internet money? Is this going to take off? I was reading all those forums with strange people shouting at each other to hodl. And, it was super exciting. I kind of kept an eye on it, but never really jumped in till with IDEO because I felt like, with IDEO, we were taking a different approach, which was to really marry this incredible technological leap of peer-to-peer money with human-centered design.
Interesting. And so what have you seen in the last 4 years at IDEO? How did the industry change?
The industry has changed, a lot over the last 4 years. Just the proliferation of new developers into the space, new designers into the space, lots of people with great product mindset, really came in. I think when we started, it was very still academic focus. So there were a lot of really great, folks who had done a lot of academic research into blockchain. But over the last 4 or 5 years, I think we've seen, more and more entrepreneurs and product-minded folks come into the space to really play with the technology and try to bring it into the real world. And that's been super exciting for us.
And when you meet those entrepreneurs, do you see them really understanding the importance of talking to the customer and building the product in chat loop, feedback loop with the customer, or do you see people differing on building first mentality?
I think it's a mix. I think you just definitely do get a mix. I think in traditional sort of Web2 companies, you kind of get that habit, of that, talk to users, get feedback, iterate a lot, sort of tighter. In blockchain, I think sometimes we don't know who the users are. So that user discovery process ends up feeling a little confusing or there isn't enough sort of data around it for people to feel like, oh, I know who my users are, I can segment them, I can target them. I remember the first project we did, which was for Augur, we were targeting a very particular segment of users. They were traders who were into crypto. And so we had to find that small sliver of segment of users to interview. And even identifying that was based on a hypothesis at that point. So that was interesting. So I think as the industry matures, we'll be able to figure out who the users are. But what really excites me are projects that look at users that are not just interested in crypto, but they're interested in a startup or project for its value. So for example, Audius, like you guys mentioned, we recently spoke to another startup called Anytype that's building sort of a Notion, sort of peer-to-peer collaborative software, and that's built on IPFS. So that's really interesting. And what we found was that the users came to them not just because of their decentralized base, but for the functionality of the product itself. So I think those startups are really interesting when you can really bridge Web2 to Web3 worlds.
And how do you think, what's the best way to do that?
I think taking a product-first and user-first mindset and not a technology-first mindset really helps. I think understanding the technology as a great tool in your toolbox is important for any founder. So as a founder, if you understand Web3, if you understand peer-to-peer money, peer-to-peer technology, that's an amazing tool that you have in your toolbox. But I wouldn't lead with that tool. I would still lead with who's the user and what's the problem you're trying to solve and seeing if Web3 or peer-to-peer technologies, help to come in and make it a much better solution. I would start with that.
And how do you envision the product design process? Like, how does that work?
I mean, product design is interesting in this space, especially for a decentralized product. I remember talking to a privacy project, and they had a first iteration of their product out, and then they said, you know what, I don't know who my users are because they're all anonymous. And they want to be anonymous. So how do I conduct user research? How do I iterate on my product? And that was a really good question. I tapped into IDEO, and some people pointed me to, sort of the user interview standards set in healthcare, where you actually interview a lot of people that want to and should stay anonymous. So I think taking a lot of those principles to keep their identity and, data private, but being able to still talk to them and be able to, get some great user feedback is important. I think product design is a really untapped innovation in Web3. I think a lot of Web3 projects are still using Web2 interfaces. So, a lot of the habits that, or interactions that we're using in Web2 today, I think we're still using it in Web3. And I think we haven't quite broken open what interfaces in Web3 look like. And it could feel and look completely different. For example, being able to publish a page or set up a P2P chat in an instant, being able to send money without having a bank account. I think all these behaviors are still not quite expressed.
Right. It's like people basically kind of not quite sure what to do with this new medium. It's kind of like, like when the internet started, people were looking at this as like, oh, it's a digital newspaper, until like 5 years in, they're like, oh, it's two-way medium. You can do things like YouTube. Or like when mobile started, people were like, oh, it's a mobile internet. And then later they're like, wait, there's GPS here, there's a camera here, we can build Instagram or Uber. So it takes time, it seems like, for people to like understand new medium, like truly see that it's very different.
Absolutely. If we're building wallets like we're building Venmo today, then I think we're still not quite scratching the surface of what it could be. So I'm really excited to see what we come up with, but I feel like we haven't quite broken that barrier.
And do you think it's what's required for that is for best product teams to join the space, or is it for people just to spend a lot of time and do a lot of experiments and kind of like develop some like intuition for the new space?
I mean, I think product teams is one. Good product teams is one solution. I think we need a diversity of perspectives. People from different industries who come into the space and basically experiment with it. Right now, we have a lot of folks with the same background, the same perspective, prototyping. And while that's great, don't get me wrong, we're not going to get that sort of Cambrian explosion of, different ideas and different interfaces that come out. So I think diversity of perspectives, great product teams, and I would say time is another one too. Just sort of really being able to play and prototype with it, where you have folks who are coming out of schools now who are native to crypto. Their grasp of the metaphors and language of Web3 is so different from even 5 years ago, and that's interesting.
Maybe we should look at NEAR more into university space.
Even high schools.
Would you recommend talking to high school students?
I would. I think they have a very different perspective. They're almost designing for their generation coming up.
And also, how do you address the kind of lack of diversity in space? Is it more about like how we use language and maybe like how to not use like lingo that exists in the blockchain space and more like use like normal language, or is it something entirely different? Is it more like having like validation points maybe and success stories? Like what would allow for a lot more different kinds of people to join into the space?
I mean, language and jargon is one. I think we are often pretty guilty of going down rabbit holes and using jargon and shortcuts when we can use much simpler language to describe something. That's one. But also just being welcoming. I think the whiteboard tutorials you guys do are great. More introduction type content would be amazing as well. Hackathons are a great way, I think, of getting different perspectives in. But yeah, it's a hard one because I think this space is so sort of technically innovative, but we haven't quite, sort of been able to make it super accessible. But with time, like with developer tools and easy APIs that would make it easier for other people to just come in and build on Web3 stuff.
And how do you think about also understanding users and kind of like really being intentional about the personas? How would people approach growth in this industry?
I mean, growth is an interesting one. I mean, I think there are some projects that have an interesting perspective on it. So for example, Pool Together, which is a project that we invested in, I think their idea of a sort of savings-based sort of lottery sort of game. It's such a new and novel concept, right? And it's interesting for users because they feel like they're playing a game, but they're actually saving. So they're putting the fun in sort of money and saving, which some people, find boring or, it's a chore. That's really interesting. So in order to tackle growth, I mean, I think they have a very interesting sort of challenge ahead of them because it's an idea that has a very potentially viral kind of loop around it. Once you're in, it'll just keep, snowballing week after week. So the more people they get, the more folks they can get in. But in terms of growth, I think, we haven't quite gotten to the point where, we are able to create sort of really great referral loops. Some of that, is based around, fear that your friend doesn't understand crypto or they don't understand the consequences of holding crypto. Are there taxes involved? Are there regulation involved? It's such a fear-based sort of thing. So I think more projects with fun in there would be great. But in terms of growth hacking, I would say reaching out to the different channels to even get the audiences you want would be super interesting. So we're not even quite using sort of, growth marketing tactics that, really get us. But I mean, Airbnb got started on Craigslist, where you find your audience. Whereas I think in crypto, we often think of, let's growth hack the crypto community. And we're like, okay, well, you're not really expanding beyond. So I think projects that sort of reach out beyond traditional or expected sort of audiences, like, going to your hackathon or reaching out through, crypto Twitter would be interesting. But I would be interested in projects that really go out there and look for your users and find them where they are. So for example, like, for protocols, I think they're actually a product for developers. But if I go to most developer conferences, I don't really see a lot of mentions of any protocols that are out there. I think that's a really interesting avenue. Like, I'll probably advertise on like Stack Overflow or GitHub or something like that and find people there.
Did you see a lot of repeat entrepreneurs joining the space? Kind of like people who've done a lot in the Web2 space and looking in the space? Or do you feel like it's too early for this? You haven't seen many of them?
I've seen a few. And these people bring in amazing expertise, whether it's in gaming or, sort of on-demand markets. I think they're super interesting. They're experienced entrepreneurs that come in with a pretty clear idea of the industry they have expertise in. And they want to marry somehow the abilities of Web3 in their industries. And they often have a very clear idea of how to do that. I would love to see more of that. I think the education gap is still pretty big. So I think a lot of experienced entrepreneurs either don't get it or they haven't quite understood, how, for example, crypto brings in, it's basically computation with a currency aspect to it, which is very powerful to be able to marry computation and currency in a massive way. And I think that's such an interesting idea and such a novel sort of innovation in the blockchain space. Instead of just transmitting data, you can transmit money. It's mind-blowing.
Yeah, people still don't quite understand how it can change so many different industries.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how do you also think about brand and power of story? And maybe you have some also successful examples.
Yeah, I mean, the power of brand is the power of community. I think we often miss that. A brand is not just a logo or colors or tone of voice. A brand is an idea that your fans, or your true fans is a term we use, basically help you amplify. So a powerful brand is a sticky brand that your fans and followers of a particular brand can sort of champion because A, they believe in your values, and B, they are able to repeat what you stand for and what they stand for. So I think that's a very, very powerful thing. It captures imaginations. It really empowers a lot of people and help them be motivated to really champion something. So the power of a brand is something I think we haven't quite harnessed in this space.
And is it something that's done kind of like together with community, or is it something that people do first as exercise, kind of like do with some authenticity, soul-searching internally, and then kind of go and see if it resonates? So like, how do you think about that piece, creating community around the brand? Is it like a dialogue two-way street, or is it like a sequence of steps?
I think it's a sequence, but I think to start, a brand is, still very much imbued with the DNA of the founders. How that team or how that founding team feels like, what they stand for. A lot of that sort of energy is often captured in it. And that attracts its first sort of maybe 50 or 100 true fans. And these are the fans that, build a community around the brand. And then obviously you can always tweak it. You can always, fine tune it. You can find ways to express it, right, in much clearer ways. So there's always sort of nuances and tensions between what a brand stands for. So for example, you can be serious, but also really experimental. You can be rebellious, but also extremely detail-oriented, for example. Like, they're weird, and these are not exact tensions, but, you can find ways to really play and to see where you are along that line. And I think there are always sort of spaces for the brand to evolve. But I think for a lot of startups, first and foremost, the DNA of the founders really, really are baked into the brand. And it comes out in a lot of the energy. If a brand is too different from what how the company feels like, then I think you start sensing a disparity in how that brand plays out.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And how do you move past the 50 people into like larger community? How does that happen?
I think when the 50 people would then canvas for you, then you get another 50, and you get another 100, and it amplifies. But I think, playing with expressions of the brand, can sort of amplify your message. But I think if your message is strong enough and your vision is compelling enough, you would find the audience, and the audience will find you. Brand is just a way of expressing that motivation. But a motivation is, it's intrinsic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why are you spending these many years of your life dedicated to this cause? There's a reason.
Yep, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we can talk a little bit about also the Unbundled Accelerator you have at IDEO. So what kind of people do you attract normally, and what kinds of tool sets they have, or what kinds of things they get from the accelerator you have today?
Yeah, so IDEO CoLab Ventures has an accelerator, or unbundled accelerator for blockchain entrepreneurs. And what's interesting about this accelerator is not, it's not like a 4-month program that you run through, and at the end of it you graduate, and so on and so forth. What we're trying to do is to really unbundle the idea of an accelerator. So what this means is that we have different programs, and some of them are 1-day sprints. And it can range from everything like sort of Founders Day, where a group of founders get together and, sort of talk shop and share problems, to Product Validation Day, where we actually help teams go through the process of interviewing their users, understanding their needs, and iterating on them. And then or to that effect, we have something called Venture Sprint Day that's coming up that is really for experienced founders new to the space. And what we want them to do is to come in, they might have, maybe a decade of expertise in a certain industry, and they're curious about blockchain. They have a hunch that somehow, Web3 could be a powerful enabler for them. And we'll, sort of jam with them through a 1-day program to see if there are ideas that they might want to pursue further. And obviously we'll bring in a network of experts, of mentors to, sort of help them validate or invalidate the idea itself.
And is it normally like mentors who are like assigned wisdom on a long-term basis, or is it like kind of people come and go on a need basis?
Yeah, I mean, to start, I think it's probably on the for-need basis until they get a solid grasp of ideas. And often the questions change. It could be anything from security models to identity politics to go-to-market. So their needs often change. And I think pairing them with the right mentor at the right stage really helps.
And do you see also a lot of like flexibility early on? People kind of change ideas, because some things could be invalidated, for example. They kind of move on to different ideas. Do you see like a lot of kind of like exploration, more like ideation phase of things, or is it more established?
For Venture Sprint Day, or?
For like accelerator overall?
I mean, I think it's a mix. I think some people have been in the space for a while, but they're looking for a new idea. So I think that's one category. I think there are some people who are totally new to crypto, but maybe not new to startups who are interested. So one is, really fluent in crypto, looking for a new idea, or experienced entrepreneurs who are interested in blockchain and sort of dipping their toes in there. And I think both, I think all of us are, even though we've been in a space for different amounts of time, it's still worth remembering it. It's still fairly young. So I think, for anyone who's intimidated about stepping in, I think, don't be. Like, this space is still emerging. I would say come in, experiment, learn a little more, and don't get, sort of bogged down by technical detail or jargon. I would say just learn sort of the abstraction and metaphors of what Web3 enables, and then sort of, let your imagination sort of be opened and sort of experiment with it. I think that's the main thing we're looking for here.
That makes sense. And do you see also a lot of like founder matching happening as a part of this community?
We hope so. I think we hope so. We have a pretty vibrant community at our space, and we often see a lot of entrepreneurs come in and out. They make friends, and then they hopefully build lasting relationships there.
I see. And do you see people more willing to do like remote kind of arrangements, kind of like remote co-founders and things like that, or?
That's interesting. I think, but for the very earliest stages, we have a few teams that are remote, but they often have known each other for a while. I would say the earliest teams, and I'm talking about like, back of the napkin, sort of seed of an idea type stage, I think so far the founders have wanted to be, pretty close. So they might be nomadic. So we know of a an awesome duo that travel together, for example. They're nomadic, but they're still pretty close as they're in the idea phase, I would say.
And do you see the space overall as like being more global versus like Web 2, for example? Kind of like Silicon Valley used to be kind of like a cluster of everything, but here like Silicon Valley is one of many hubs. Seems like, do you agree with that? Or
I do agree. I mean, I do think that Web 2 as well is becoming more global. So I think that's an interesting, sort of observation. I mean, if you look at obviously products coming out of China, products coming out of Indonesia, products coming out of Berlin, I think those are interesting Web 2 companies, that are sort of becoming very, very distributed globally, and they still can reach a pretty big audience. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that in the next decade.
I see.
So for Web3, I think it's great that everyone's nomadic and it feels like it's a very global movement in essence. And I think, I do think that this is a trend that follows most tech companies, I would say.
And maybe you can mention a little bit on State of Crypto report that just got released.
So we released a collaborative State of Crypto report, State of Adoption report for 2019. And this was a project that I worked with Elias Simos. I've actually not met him. Funny, we were just talking about remote work. So I've been collaborating with him for about 6 months, I think. Well, I don't think I've met him in person. So we've caught up over video calls and obviously chat. We worked on this report collaboratively with over a dozen of our favorite funds and founders. Because I think as we were working through this report, I think we realized that the best way to get a good overview of the year was to get multiple perspectives in. So we roped in, over a dozen of these companies and really did a pretty comprehensive overview of, everything from what the market is looking like, developer growth, number of new dApps, what are some interesting projects to like innovations in mining, staking and validation, DAOs. So it's pretty comprehensive. Check it out at stateofcrypto.report and let us know what you think.
What was the most surprising out of the data points?
What was surprising? I think we need more developers. I think that was the major takeaway for me. I think 2019 was a really great year for a lot of infrastructure building, and there was a lot of sort of development on the infrastructure front. But I think what was most, not shocking, but I think the numbers were pretty dismal to me, was sort of the trend of number of developers in the space is trending down.
Yep.
Number of new dApps as well that's being launched is going down. So, as much as there is a lot of excitement around new protocols and projects that are launching, I feel like, we kind of need to keep the momentum up and energy up in the space.
And what do you think will take to get this momentum back up? Is it like validating a couple successes, or like what does it take to get people back into joining the space?
We could have a new protocol launch.
Right.
I don't know. I think more innovation in the space could be cool. I think a couple of success cases, be super exciting. Or just, really great new interfaces that capture imaginations. I think that could be really great too.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening today. You can find more episodes of this podcast at openwebcollective.com, where you can also apply for either cohort or founder program. Again, it's openwebcollective.com. If you've enjoyed this episode today, please leave us a review either on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever place you go to for podcasts. Lastly, if you're on Twitter, please follow us at openwebfounders. I'll see you next week.